All right, how y'all doing tonight?
Yeah, beer is over there. Guys, don't hesitate. Take some beer, then you'll definitely win a book.
That'll make my presentation so much better if you are drinking during that.
It is so heavy.
So I'm here to talk about Sitecore and Helix. This is kind of the extent of my Polish. I've learned a few words. But, so just want to talk about, real quick, the few things that we'll talk about today. We're going to talk just an overview about software architecture in general. Then we're going to talk about the layers of Helix and how that helps to support that architecture. And then we'll talk about how we actually start building features and using some of these principles inside a Helix-based solution. So let's start with architecture. What does Sitecore say about architecture? Well, Tom Eldblum, one of the principal people that was responsible for bringing Helix together, says that architecture is about defining the principles that make it possible to change. So writing software that is flexible and maintainable is kind of the goal of architecture. And we've got four pillars that really kind of make this up. We've got the principles of the architecture that tell you why you're doing something, which is very important, because if you don't understand why you're doing something, it's going to be hard to get more junior members of your team involved, following some of those principles. So telling you why you made some of these choices. Conventions show you how to do it. You've got examples that show you some examples of actually implementing it, and then tools that help guide you through that process. So what happens if you don't spend time to get the architecture right up front? Well, over time, the cost of making changes to your applications goes up dramatically over time. I don't know if it's actually a logarithmic scale or exponential or whatever mathematical term it is, but it goes up a lot over time. So when you spend time to get the architecture right up front, you can dramatically reduce the cost of change later on, so that you can spend more time adding value to your solution and adding value to your customer, and less time with actually dealing with coupling issues or dependency problems or things like that. So when you start a new site, you it starts with a plan. You've got this idea. Okay, I need to replace this site, and it's just this site. It's kind of one thing. So you kind of start there, and then you think, well, what if I start breaking this up a little bit? So this guy, he wrote some code and put something in some base classes or service or something, start sharing some code. So he's kind of happy with life. He goes on, he does a little bit more, shares a little bit more code, writes a few more services, things like that can be reused. And so far, it's just been him. He's the only guy that's been touching the code. Well, then he brings in one guy. He didn't tell him about why. He didn't explain the why of the principles. So this other guy went off and wrote some rogue piece of code out there, shared, put a reference to a project that shouldn't have been referenced, that kind of thing. And that quickly turned into kind of a mess. And it's about this time that you just say, screw it, call in sick. No, seriously though, this is where Helix comes in. This is the idea about defining the principles of making Sitecore implementations maintainable. So what is Helix? Has everybody heard of Helix? Pretty much? Many people using it yet? I know you were talking about one. Okay, so Habitat's been out for a little over a year, the example implementation of Helix. But the Helix principles themselves are still relatively new. But So from the Helix documentation that is available, by the way, if you're not sure, didn't know about it, but it is available at helix.sitecore.net. But from the documentation, they say that Helix is a set of overall design principles and conventions for Sitecore development. But Sitecore didn't go run off into a room for 6 months or 12 months or something like that and just come up with some crazy stuff on their own. Everything that is Helix is all based on typical design patterns and principles that you would use in any kind of development, not just Sitecore. And it's really based on the principles of package design by Robert Martin. And it goes, we won't talk about all of these in detail here, but these are the 6 principles that make up the principles for package design. And these are the ones that are the basis of Helix. So going back to this, this picture, what's wrong with this, other than the fact that some of the boxes are crooked?
No organization.
Right, no organization. But the biggest problem is dependencies. So we've got dependencies going, you think this is your base layer and everything, and now he went off and created a dependency up there, and now we've got some circular stuff going on, and it's just, things are going crazy. So Helix is, the basis of Helix really is all about controlling dependencies and dependency flow. So controlling dependencies, this is where we get into the first of those design principles. We talk about the stable dependency principle. And this states that the dependencies between packages in a design should be in the direction of stability of those packages. So one package should never have a dependency on something that's less stable than itself. It should only have a dependency on something that's more stable than itself. So this is where the layers of Helix come in. So we've got 3 layers defined. We've got the project, the feature, and the foundation layer. And all of these are about helping to control dependency flow. So everything, and we'll talk about these a little bit more in detail, but everything at your foundation layer should be the most stable. The feature layer is your most flexible, and then the project layer is your most unstable set. But here's an example of Helix allowing you to control your dependencies. So the idea behind this isn't necessarily to simplify your dependencies. That's not the goal. The goal is just to control them, to put in place some rules that help you to control that. So here we've got modules depending on a number of things and everything, but everything's going the right way. Everything's going from the least stable to the most stable. So one thing I noticed when I was reading through the documentation is that I just thought it was an interesting enough sentence to kind of put it in this presentation. But the 3 layers, typically when you see a design of something and you see 3 layers in it, or at least for me, the first thing I think, we're talking about an in-tiered design of an application. So we've got a presentation layer that's all the view. We've got the business logic layer, and then we've got the data access layer. It's kind of the thing I think of when I see things split up into 3 when we're talking about software design. But that's not really what we're talking about with Helix. We're not, one does not equate the other. So just thought I'd kind of make that clear. I just thought it was interesting. So let's talk about the layers themselves. So starting with the project layer, this is what provides the context of the solution. So this is where you stitch together all of the features and the foundation that you've been using all that time. You stitch it all together to create one cohesive solution. And it's also what brings together the graphical design. So this is where you're going to see things like CSS and some global level JavaScript and things like that. It's also going to be where you're going to see if you're storing your Sitecore items in source control as well, you'll see this is where you'll have your page types and your layouts and things like that, because those are going to be very solution specific. So it's going to be specific to the site you're building. Also, the CSS is another one that is going to be specific to the site that you're using. So your feature, say you have a navigation feature, for instance, how the navigation functions really doesn't matter if it's in site A or site B. How it looks, on the other hand, is a function of what project or what module it's in the project layer, so the site that it's in. So moving on to the feature layer, this is where we create concrete features of a solution as defined by the business. So this is where we group together projects and modules by function. So it's not by technology, but it's by business function. So if you've got, you're not creating features about how to access SQL Server, or features or modules how to access, access databases or whatever. I'm just gonna make shit up, but that's not how you're grouping it. You're grouping it by business function. So I need to maintain accounts, for instance, or I need to search my site, or I need to provide navigation. So these are more business related functions and how you group them together into a module. And what this does is it ensures that changes to one feature don't cause changes to another. And this is where our second principle comes in, the common closure principle, that states that classes that change together are packaged together. So now you can ensure, if you're packaging things based around business function, now you can ensure that a change to the navigation feature isn't going to change account management, for instance. So it's all kind of based on the common closure principle. So if we take this example, here I've got the three layers depicted and a few modules. So if we were to create a dependency between two modules in the feature layer, would this be considered a good dependency or a bad dependency? Anybody? It's a bad one. So no, we don't do it this way, because the stable dependency principle states that any module can't have a dependency on anything that's less stable than itself. So all of the dependencies that a module in the feature layer should come from the foundation layer. Features should never depend on each other. Some of the things that you're going to find in a module in the feature layer are going to be code. This is where all your C# is going to be. It's going to be all your markup for the feature, any config files on how to make that module function, things that you can configure are going to be in that feature module. Feature specific JavaScript. So if you're controlling button clicks, for instance, with Angular or just jQuery, whatever, those kind of things, that kind of JavaScript belongs with the feature module, doesn't belong with the rest of the JavaScript in the project layer, because now you're creating a dependency the wrong way. So you've got a button that's defined in your feature module that is actually handled somewhere else. So you'll have JavaScript there. Other things you're going to have in the feature layer are going to be your Sitecore items for templates and renderings. We'll go into these in a little bit more detail later. But yeah, the templates are going to be the basis for your models for those modules, and the renderings are going to be actually what renders. It's going to be the controller rendering, so the view rendering, stuff that's got some business logic about knowing where to get that data and things like that. The foundation layer, this is going to be the most stable layer of your solution. It's going to be where you're going to see some interaction with frameworks, some interaction with third-party things. So for instance, the Sitecore API. This could be a module, accessing the Sitecore API should be a module that's in the foundation layer. Bringing together jQuery, Angular, your IOC configuration, any kind of ORMs that you're using, things like that. These are all candidates for foundation layer modules, because they're going to be one of the most stable things in your solution, because they're not going to change much. They're going to be abstracted away, and they're not going to change much. Some other things about the foundation layer. It is conceptually abstract. This is where you go into the stable abstractions principle that I don't actually put up here, but that's based on the stable abstractions principle. You're not going to have, in the foundation layer, you're not going to have any presentation elements. You're not going to have views in the foundation layer that are shared amongst features or anything like that, but you will have solution-specific business logic could be in the foundation layer. So things that need to be shared between modules. So for instance, I mentioned an account management module earlier. If you're interacting with a third-party system for maintaining accounts, whether it's CRM or something like that, you could, you might have your account management feature might need to actually, manage profile data, for instance. But you might have a navigation feature that's somewhere in the nav that says display the name. So you need to go get that information from the same place. So now you could conceptually have two modules going to try to get the same data. So that makes it a candidate, if you abstract it right, that makes it a candidate to go into the foundation layer. So any kind of business logic that could be shared amongst feature modules should belong in the foundation layer.
Jason, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
May I?
Yeah.
So when we are thinking about components in Sitecore, how it can be, or how can we blend this Helix idea while we are writing components?
Mm-hmm.
So a component is in the project layer, or it spans through all the layers. How we can transform from that idea into componentization, which was delivered with Sitecore as native mechanism.
Yeah, well, I mean, typically your components would go in the feature layer. And you would group them together. So you might have a feature module called media, for instance. I think there's one of those in the Habitat example that deals with components that are for playing video, or for slideshows, or kind of hero images or things like that. Things that are media related could be grouped together as a module, a feature module in the feature layer. That makes sense? So
Okay.
you could be calling the Sitecore API to actually get that data, and it would be calling a module in the foundation layer that would be abstracted away so that it knows how to go actually get the data from Sitecore, but all the markup and actually how any business logic related with that would be in the feature layer. Make sense?
Okay.
So here I brought this this depiction back up. If we were to create a dependency between modules in the foundation layer, we already found out that it's not a good idea to do it between modules in the feature layer. But if we have dependencies between modules in the foundation layer, is this good or bad? This is actually good. This is good because these are the most stable modules in your solution. As long as you are following these two principles, then relationships or dependencies between modules in the foundation is okay. So as long as you don't have circular references, which Visual Studio protects you from most of that, but if you don't, maybe you've got JavaScript calling, elements or something like that. So as long as you don't have circular references between your modules, and as long as you're following the stable abstractions principle that says abstractness increases with stability. So not to really go too deep into this, but foundation layer, anything in the foundation layer should be abstract. So for instance, calling the Sitecore API. This should be an abstract thing. So you should have an interface down there that really is just, it's very generic. So as long as you're following the stable abstractions principle and you don't have any circular references, then you can have dependencies between modules in the foundation layer. So now what is it like to actually build it? So setting up the solution. the Helix documentation does talk about this as well, but setting up the solution, you create solution folders that match the Helix the Helix layer. So you've got the foundation layer, the feature layer, and the project layer. You've got solution folders for those in Visual Studio. You've got separate solution folders for each module. So here in this example, we've got a news feature that has all the projects related to it. We've got a navigation feature. We've got a model feature in the foundation, ORM, things like that. So grouping together your projects related to a single business function belong in a solution folder named after that. And it usually the namespace for the names of your projects usually follow this namespace-like pattern where you have solution name layer, so foundation, feature, project, whatever the module name is, up there, for instance, navigation or news, and then a logical function if you have one. So, for instance, we've got .master here. This is serialization from the Sitecore database, and then we've got a testing project. So, following that naming convention. Also on disk, they also suggest that you follow that same kind of folder structure, so that you've got project, feature, foundation layer folders, and in those you're following that same folder structure that you set up in Visual Studio. So, following that same thing, you've got feature, navigation, news. These are your module names, and then inside your module name is where you break it up even a little further. Break it up into the code, which is going to be all the project, all the code for the feature. You've got a serialization folder that's going to have all the serialized Sitecore items, so whether you're using TDS or Unicorn or something like that, that's where those would belong. And then any testing projects would go in the tests folder. So this is what the documentation suggests for disk structure. So moving on to template types. So this is going to be kind of the foundation for building the features out. These are the template types that are defined in the documentation. And we'll go through each one of these, but interface templates are probably the most important one because they're the foundation for the model of your content, the interface template. And then page template, for instance, is bringing all that together. So if we start with interface templates, these interface templates, like I mentioned, these are going to be the basis for your models for your feature modules. So they form the base for the content that goes in the content tree. Any interface templates are going to live in either a feature or a foundation module. They're never going to be in the project layer. They're just going to be in the feature and foundation. Interface templates are never instantiated as content, so we'll talk about from page types how we do this, but you would never create a content item that is of type _interest or _login teaser, for instance. But these interface templates are what are used as base templates for page type templates that are created as content items in the content tree. And they do follow a naming convention. This is where the conventions pillar of the architecture comes in. They are prefixed with an underscore, so kind of an easy way for you to see that it's an interface template. And then the page type templates. These only exist in the project layer. They wouldn't exist anywhere in the feature or foundations, just in the project layer. And these are what's going to make up the pages or the content on the site itself. So in the actual content tree, you would find all the page types. And these templates are used to assert consistency across pages, and so you can define insert options so that you can control some information architecture. So if you've got, for instance, a news folder, set some insert options on that page type template for that news folder you can only create news items, for instance. And these page type templates are what serve as an integration point between your features and foundations. So creating those base, inheriting from those base types are what put these page type templates together. And typically these page types, they don't have any fields themselves. All of the content that is made up from that comes from all of the interface templates or data source templates that it inherits from. Data source templates are very much like page type templates, only they don't have any associated layout. So again, they derive from interface templates just like page templates did. They only exist in the project layer, don't have any associated layouts, and they also don't have any fields. Settings templates, these are ones that would be used to configure modules in your solution. But settings templates should exist only in the feature or the foundation, not in the project layer. They're not used by project modules as base templates, so you don't need to create, like we created page type templates with interface ones. You don't need to create separate templates that inherit from these settings templates. You can just use these out of the box. Folder templates, I'm sure we've all used these before, but you're essentially creating an item so that you can control insert options, is kind of the idea. So you can set icons on them to make it easier for content authors and things like that to find things and to quickly see what they're after. Finally, rendering parameter templates. Again, just like folder templates, they only exist in the feature and foundation modules. They're prefixed with parameters templates underscore, so you can kind of see easily which are your rendering parameter templates. And these are just, they do exactly what they say. They're for setting parameters on renderings. So let's look at some examples of doing this. So I talked about that inheritance model of a page type inheriting from either feature interface templates or foundation interface templates, like things like that. So we've got an item here. Item has a layout. Layout has a few renderings on it. So how does this actually look? The model hierarchy look? Well, if we take a look, this item is based on a page template. So for instance, there might be, I've talked about account management. So there might be an account management. This might be account management page type, for instance, and that would live in the project module. Since the page types don't have any fields itself, it's going to inherit from an interface template in the feature layer that might be about basic profile information, for instance. And then there might be another interface template that this page type inherits from that is going to be, what are my notes? That's going to be about, sorry, this is the first time I'm doing this one. It might be about page metadata. So for instance, data that goes in the head tag of the page. All of those fields are going to live in this interface template about metadata. And then finally, you might have one last interface template that's about indexing. So you want to search some of the content that's on this page. Well, that's going to come from a foundation layer interface template that's in a module in the foundation layer. So moving on from that, let's look at an actual example of this. So here we've got a news article. This is a news article page template. This page template doesn't have any fields itself, but it has two interface templates that it inherits from. So all the fields that are going to be on this content item in the content tree come from these two interface templates. And then we look at the presentation details of this. When we actually create the content item in the content tree, we've got my news article. This is based on the news article page template that we just saw. And then we've got the controller renderings. And these are coming from, for instance, the news article controller rendering is coming from the news feature. The page metadata is coming from the metadata module, metadata feature. So this is what kind of stitches all of that together. And then just quickly about the interface itself, we've got the interface template here is defined in the feature folder of the news module. This is what contains all the fields. So here's all the fields that we've got defined for a news article. This corresponds directly to our model in the in the project, in the feature layer, that is iNews article. We look at that one. It's got the exact same field names as the template, the interface template did. And then over on the right here, I've got, I'm using Glass for this one, so I'm just configuring up Glass Mapper to auto map all of my fields that are named the same thing. So if you look at the Helix documentation, they don't, or the Habitat solution, they don't use any IOC or ORMs or anything. They just talk about referencing fields by ID. I don't like that approach. I like ORMs better. So this is just an example of that. And then finally, the controller rendering. We've got, when we get our object from Glass Mapper, for instance, in our controller rendering, this is kind of where you see that separation of concerns come in. Because what we're dealing with right now is we've got the current item. The current item is a page type, is a news article page type. So it's got a bunch of features, or a bunch of fields on it. But when we get that item, because we have our model set up in our feature module, we can cast that as the model we defined in the news feature and only work with the data, the data that's exposed through the iNews article interface. So lastly, let's talk about layouts.
Excuse me, I have one question.
Yep.
Regarding this whole interfacing with templates. Let's say we've got a page template that is defined in the product layout, and it is referencing in our mind, let's say the interface template that was, for example, provides SEO information like keywords, author, description, etc. Now, this is our assumption that in the final product, this interface template will be inherited by the page template. What if another approach also we have in mind that they will be deployed by different packages, and we are not sure, we do not have the 100% guarantee that the metadata package will be deployed. What in that case? Shall we not inherit the interface template, or shall we do it and then enforce the deployment of the package?
Well, the idea behind deployment of this solution is you're not deploying just a single feature, you're deploying the site as a whole. So when you deploy a site, it's got, when you create your page type, for instance, your news article page type that's in the project layer, you know that it's got, because you're creating this solution as a whole, you know that it's inheriting from those base classes. So you know that when it comes time to deploy everything, you're deploying the site as a whole, so you're not going to be missing a feature. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that has we've debated about internally at RBA, is deploying single features on change. Versus, you just make a change to the navigation feature, for instance, and you only deploy that. But actually, if you look in the Helix documentation, they talk about you deploy the system as a whole. So the whole solution, the project layer, all the feature modules, all the foundation modules, things like that, all at once. So layouts. Layouts and sublayouts, or in MVC view renderings. These are going to belong in the project layer. So these are the things that define the structure of the page, how whether it's got options for a right rail, for instance, or header and footer, or whether it's got a left rail or not, things like that. These are the kind of things that are going to belong in the project layer. But they're used primarily for structuring the page. We're not talking about going and getting data from Sitecore or displaying data, anything like that. It's just about simple markup and division of the page. So here we've got an example of a layout. So again, this is just defining some placeholders. It's defining some markup on how those placeholders should be divided, but it's not actually displaying any information. It's not defining anything about the, you've got the classes listed there, but it's you don't have any of that CSS information here. And another one, we've got just for example, a view rendering that is splitting up the page into 2 columns. If you're using Bootstrap, it's a 8-column and a 4-column. So we're just talking about here with layouts and sublayouts, we're just talking about subdivisions of the page. So this is only markup. So this stuff belongs in the project layer. And then we've got controller and view renderings. So these are going to be much more functional about going and getting the data from Sitecore and displaying it on the page. These are going to belong in your feature layer with the module that it belongs to. And it's going to contain some level of business logic. So for instance, for example here, we've got some markup that tells us how to present it, but we've also got the logic in there to actually display the content. So this stuff is going to belong in the feature layer. And then one other thing I wanted to point out, and I do this because we actually made this mistake on a project that we're working on, is design for maintainability. One of the things that as developers, we're kind of ingrained in us, beating our head for a long time, is try to share as much code as you can. If you write it once and use it multiple times, this is gonna make our life so easier. So it's something that we just naturally want to do. If we've already written a class and we see a week later that you write another piece of functionality that needs the exact same information, then you want to reuse the class. Well, we did that a lot. Well, not a lot. We did it some with a project that we were working on, where we saw certain pieces of markup that were going to be used in multiple places and throughout multiple modules. So we actually took some of that markup and put it in the foundation layer. And it made it simple for us to reuse it, but actually now what we had done is we had created this dependency on a foundation layer module just for display purposes. And I was talking to some of the guys on Slack about that, and they said, that's really not what you're after. What you're after is you're designing for maintainability and simplicity, not reusability. So the idea is even if the markup is the same, so for instance, if you've got in one place you're displaying information about a customer, and then another place you're displaying information about a contact or a member or something like that, you're going to be displaying the same thing: first name, last name, things, a lot of similar information. But so you could technically get some reuse out of that. But now, if you want to change something about the member, how you're displaying that, it's necessarily going to change something about the customer, or whatever example I use. Sorry. But you've now created this unnecessary coupling. So the idea is whatever makes it better or whatever makes it more maintainable for the business. So you don't want to create dependencies between business units with things like that. So design for maintainability and simplicity, not necessarily reusability. So finally, some next steps. What do you do now? There is a Helix workshop to get more information about this. So this is a recording of the workshop that was given right before the day before Symposium in New Orleans this past September. So it's a series of 10 videos given by Tom L. Blom and Anders Lob. They just go through the whole thing. So it's that entire workshop is available on YouTube. There's also a really active channel on Slack. If you're not familiar with Slack, we do have a Sitecore team out there. If you're not a member of that already, just let me know. I can send you an invite. But there's a Helix and Habitat channel specific for this on Slack, and it's really active. So any questions with that, you can shoot it out there, and you're going to have an answer in minutes. And finally, last but not least, I just wrote a book, in case anybody heard that. And really what we talk about in here is we are following all the same Helix principles. We're following that modular architecture design. So this, we talk about a lot of the best practices around that. So that's another good resource. So if you need to contact me for anything, I'm Longhorn Taco on Slack and Twitter. You see my blog there, citizensitecore.com. Finally, any other questions?
So, do I understand correctly? Is this statement is true that basically this Helix architecture, this is a special case of microservice architecture with very strict, maybe even not guideline, but rule about the dependencies? Can you say something like that?
Yeah, it is kind of like creating a series of microservices. You're not necessarily setting up each one as an independent service, but it is kind of that way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so for your question, we have a prize, Jason's book, so congratulations.
So, one more.
Well, there you go.
Basically, already what? So, no. But what are the, what are the pros over the old school MVC model?
Well, you're still going to use that same approach with using the Helix principles. You're still going to be using MVC, and you can still even and this is the way we do it. Even within each of those modules, I had that slide that said that the 3 layers don't necessarily equal the n-tiered architecture. That doesn't mean you can't use it. In fact, the way we do it in RVA is inside each of those modules in the feature layer, we have an n-tiered architecture. So we've got our presentation layer, we've got our service layer that has all of the business logic for getting all of that data and sending it back to the controller to be rendered. So we've got all that abstracted out so it's easy to test. So we're still using that n-tiered approach. So you can still use all of those principles. The Helix thing really is just about trying to control those dependencies so that you make it easier to change later on.
Thank you. One more question.
Yeah.
The Helix architecture specifies that the presentation, the very specific presentation and the styling is in the project layer.
Right.
However, the view renderings and the controller renderings are in the feature layers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if there is a component, let's say view rendering, that is very versatile, for example, collapsible panel.
Mm-hmm.
However, it requires a very specific styling due to the usage of some kind of UI framework defined by the requirements of the project. What then? Should I copy the feature into the project layer, or should I somehow alternate it in the loop?
Well, the functionality for that collapsible panel would be in the feature layer. The framework that it relies on, you could bring in as a foundation module to actually kind of import that, import all of that. Brain fart here. You can import that framework as a foundation module, and then any styling for that would belong in the project layer, though. So if there's specific classes that you've got in your feature layer, those are going to have to be defined in your CSS in the project layer.
It's more about the HTML itself. Because if you have this simple matter of the CSS process and the styling of the HTML elements, then it's okay. But I'm talking about the situation when we've got a very specific HTML structure that needs to be placed in the view of this view rendering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that will go in your feature layer.
Even though it actually belongs to the project as it is a very specific styling of the element?
Well, you're just talking about the markup that is generated for that. So as far as Helix is concerned, that's going to be part of the view. You could probably argue it either way, but as I understand it, strictly based on Helix, that markup for that, even though it's specific to the framework that you're using, would belong in your feature layer.
last question. Do we have some sort of a checklist? For example, when we are starting the fresh project, the start, do we have the checklist that, okay, that I did A, B, C, D, and that means that I will continue in Helix architecture from now on?
Well, there will be, there are some scripts, I didn't really talk about them here, but there are some tools out there that have been generated by people in the community for creating that solution, creating that kind of the disk structure, the solution structure, all that. Out there from, like, there's some Yeoman scripts, for instance. Somebody wrote some PowerShell to create all that to kind of get you set up. But there's also something from Hedgehog. Sean Holmesby and his team created FXCOP, some FXCOP rules. So you can have those integrated into your build process, or your build process, so that you can make sure that you don't have any rogue references or things like that. So that can help you along the way make sure that you're still following all the principles.
Is it
So-
available on the community somewhere?
Yep, those, yeah, in fact, I think they just did a blog post on it recently. So, yeah, those FXCOP rules, examples of the rules. They may not be the rules, you might have to change them for your environment and your team, but,
Not
So,
available.
yep.
Okay, so the previous question, as you got the book, so the previous question I prized you with the mug, so congratulations. And if there are any questions more, so
I have a question.
One more?
Yeah, because I already have experience creating a project on basic study data.
Mm-hmm.
And actually we failed on the feature layer. We create foundation, it was fine. We created a project layer, divided into websites,
Mm-hmm.
and we failed on the features because in time, customer changed his requirement, adds some dependency between the business units and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, what's your suggestion in finding the balance between creating additional modules and not to overcomplicate it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's all gonna go down to what's gonna make it more maintainable for the customer at the end of the day. So, if you've got one business unit that requires, a group of X functionality, for instance, and then another business unit that requires Y. Even if they're trying to use the same thing, they're trying to accomplish the same thing, create them separately so that they can change independently. So that's kind of some of the suggestions that I gotten from Tom.
So you suggest to create modules for, I would say, some business functionalities, like, I don't know, this is the modules for booking, this is the modules for news,
Mm-hmm.
so on, and not to create modules for, based on the page components.
Right, yeah. So it would be components that really kind of serve the same purpose. You could put in one module, but yeah, I mean, your examples are a good one. So anything related to booking could be a module by itself. So really think about if a change happens to some piece of functionality, what else has to be deployed or what else has to be changed based on that change. And if you find a group of other classes that had to change because you made this one change, then all of that should probably be packaged together in a single module. So following that common closure principle, all changes that classes that change together should be packaged together, kind of follows that same thing.
okay, so thanks for a question and another mark for you.
I have another question.
Okay.
Just one mark.
Wait, I can't give you 2 marks, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one.
But you can drink 2 beers out of it.
Oh. I have 2 questions. Yeah, this is also some live example of our experience. Because we choose Habitat because our project was divided into several parties, several development teams, and each of them is responsible for one website. And as you said, in this architecture, you deploy the whole page as once. And do you have any plans to divide this deployment? So one team can deploy only their side.
Well, the idea, I kind of like that idea, that you only deploy what changed. But the problem now becomes you've created this scenario where you're never really sure what version of the solution that you have out there, because you might have a news feature, for instance, that's been deployed 7 or 8 times, but then the navigation feature has only been deployed once. So they could be.
I'm not saying about. Let's say we have stable foundation, stable feature layer, but we only want to deploy, for example, the project, because the project are a website in our case, and each team only wants to deploy their website.
Okay. So you're talking about just deploy the project, their specific project layer modules?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I personally like that approach, but based on the Helix documentation, they say when you deploy the solution, you deploy the whole solution. You don't deploy independent solutions. So if there's a case where you've got multiple project layer modules that want to be deployed independently, maybe they're different solutions, actual solution files.
Yeah. Because for our reasons, we created some solution to deploying only the parts of the website. But I'm wondering if it will be supported by the architecture.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly supported. There's not anything technically that's going to stop you from doing it, but based on the kind of the principles behind Helix, it should all be deployed at once. Okay. Well, dziękuję. My other Polish.
Thanks, Jason. That was awesome. That was super cool. And so many of you got prizes, so that's also cool.